that you use for the super virtual background? Because they send like a picture or something like that.
Yeah, it's a picture. Yeah.
Okay.
Or you can change to the usual Shiba if that works with Zoom.
It works, but I think that if I do that, the Shiba is gonna be more important than the presentation.
Interesting.
And let me see this stuff here. Open content.
So let's just wait for 1 more minute, then we start.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I have my virtual background right there. I think so.
Yeah, there's some people asking me for the link. 1 second. Alfonso, ¿es tu mujer al fondo?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
but she's gonna stop soon.
Okay, perfect. I think just one more person who is studying at the moment. Let's go.
Let's go.
OK，我用中文说2句啊，大家好，欢迎大家参加我们今天下午的分享会。我是李江干，Momentum Works 的创始人。我等下还在有人进来。今天下午的目的呢，其实很简单，就是过去的几个月，我也知道，就是在中国的大家可能，看到东南亚发生很多事情，然后也知道就是各个国家在疫情的处理的情况下，不太一样，所以有很多信息，传递过来，但是可能，对这个市场到底在发生什么，然后这个疫情到底有什么样的影响，可能不是特别的，可能就是信息可能并不一定特别的通畅，因为毕竟就是，国际旅行不太方便嘛，所以说，我们在前段时间跟Cento一起整理了一些就东南亚今年上半年，创投的一些资料，也包括就是中国资本在这边的参与，就目的呢，也就是说给大家知道一下，就是这个市场目前正在真实发生的一些情况。然后呢，我们是想，既然有了这样的一个报告，然后，也就组织一个小规模的分享会，然后给大家做一下解读，所以我们在会上现在除了我之外，还有就是Dmitry Levit，Cento Ventures 的应该是创始合伙人嘛。Sorry man， I'll translate in a bit.
Go for it.
Yeah，应该是创始合伙人嘛。然后 Dmitry 呢是在东南亚做投资已经做了10多年了。然后应该是2010年到12年的时候，他就已经是在越南的 IDG 做过一段时间，然后后来就是创立了自己的基金。然后他本身呢是俄罗斯的背景。然后在会上呢也有我的同事Alfonso 是负责我们这边的 insights，就是因为就是我们这市场上有很多信息，然后我们进行整理、进行输出，这个都是 Alfonso 这边负责。他本身是来自智利，但是也在新加坡待了一段时间了。所以before we start，我们开始之前，我想问一下大家有没有什么特别的问题，想在接下来的1个半小时的时间里得到答案的？如果如果有特别的问题的话，你其实可以或者现在告诉我们，或者说你打在那个就是对话框里面都可以的。So I'm just asking if people have some questions at the moment. If they do have the questions, they're welcome to either sort of speak up at the moment now, or just type into the dialog box as we go. So I already see the first question coming in. Can you summarize the fundraising events for Southeast Asia VC so far this year? It's fundraising for VCs. Okay. Anyway, so 如果大家有更多的问题的话，可以打在对话框里面。然后可能我接下来我就让 Dmitry 对公司对 Cento 做一个简短的介绍，然后同时讲解一下就是我们的这个报告。Dmitry, I just said that just pass it over to you to give a introduction about yourself as well as Cento, and maybe followed by a quick run through of the report before we answer the questions. And it seems that many of the audience would understand English, but for the sake of the rest, please speak a little bit slowly, and I'll help you translate.
I'll switch to short, kind sentences, and thank you so much for having me and for helping with the translation as well. So welcome everybody to our cast. My name is Dmitry. I've been in the venture game in Southeast Asia for the last 10 years, most of them as a partner with Cento Ventures. We are a Series A and early B investor in the region, and we represent a collection of LPs from North Asia and Europe both. And for the sake of developing their understanding of the region, we have been running a variety of research projects in-house since 2012, trying to understand the dynamics of this region. And what you see in front of you today is a result of that research, which we publish on our website every 6 months. This time around done in collaboration with Momentum Works, for which I thank our colleagues and friends there.
OK，那我就是简短的翻译一下，就 Dmitry 做了一个自我介绍，就是他在东南亚的 VC 投资界已经工作了大概10年，然后在过去的8年呢，就是作为 Cento Venture 的合伙人，然后 Cento Venture 呢是在东南亚主要投 A 轮跟B 轮早期的一些项目，然后代表的 LP 是来自北亚跟欧洲，然后从2012年开始其实就是 Cento Venture 开始的时候，他们就开始做一些对这个市场的一些了解的一些调研的活动，然后每几个月也会发布一些报告跟信息，然后现在我们要大家一起go through的这个报告呢，就是我们今年上半年合作的，就是给就是东南亚的今年上半年的就整体的投融资情况做一个了解。Over to you.
Cool. So I guess we should start straight away with the turning of pages of the report, but perhaps to leave more space for Q&A with our audience, I'll only give a very short summary of some slides and just skip the others, because Jianggan, we will be able to share this file on your website and ours just after this session, right?
Yeah. 所以呢，就是我们就接下来简短的把这个就是报告过一下，然后不会花太多时间，我们想把就是更多的时间留给解答大家的问题。然后这个报告呢也会在会后就是我们会给大家发送一份，然后也会在我们的网站上可以下载。Yeah.
So let's launch straight into the slides. I guess we'll skip the summary and go straight to the highlight number. Yep, this is just introduction of Cento. I think we can skip that. So here is the big number. We track our data by a month, but to group everything that has flown into Southeast Asia in the first half of 2020, we are looking at just north of $5 billion, which is quite spectacular considering what's happening in the world at the moment.
在2020年的上半年，我们总共追踪到了就是进入东南亚的就是风投的投资是56亿美金，在疫情的情况下，这个还是蛮不错的。Over to you.
And to the next slide, as you guys know, if you're keeping an eye on this region, reporting of value of investment in this region is dominated by large deals. So as we call them, mega deals, the ones that have several $100 million in the headline. While they are no doubt interesting and well covered, we find it even more interesting to take a look at what's happening below the layer of mega deals. And so this slide shows that out of 5.6 billion invested, 3.6 is driven by mega deals, which still leaves 2 billion in the true blue Series A, B, C, D investment, which is the rather interesting part of the ecosystem.
大家应该都知道，就是以前关于东南亚的一些就是投融资的信息，大部分都是有很大一部分是超过1亿美金以上的，就是比较大的就是投资案例。那今年上半年呢，就是在这一个领域，我们追踪到了36亿美元的投资。有意思的就是还有20亿美元左右是比这个单笔额度比这个小的融资，也是包括就是早期的包括 A、B、C 轮的一些融资。这个方面我们觉得是更加能代表东南亚未来就是这个创投的走向。Over to you.
And on the next slide, that very same 2.1 billion that is not mega deals is broken down further into the dark brown color that represents deals below 10 million, and then the deals between 10 to 50 per deal, and then 50 to 100. An aside here is that I don't think in Southeast Asia we still have an agreement as to what Series A, B, C, and D stands for. So instead, for simplicity, we just go with dollar ranges. And what's interesting on this slide is, to my mind, is that on top of the pretty stable seed and Series A ecosystem in brown, we are seeing steady growth and very impressive growth of the 10 to 50 deals, which is Series B and Series C. That's a pretty new development, only last couple, well, maybe 2 to 3 years. A bunch of funds have emerged that are capable of writing checks like that in Southeast Asia.
大家看一下这张幻灯片，下面的那些比较深色的是单笔1000万美金以下的投资，然后中间呢是1000万单笔1000万到5000万之间的投资，然后上面的浅色的是单笔5000万到1亿的投资。那我们可以因为在东南亚现在就是大家还没有一个统一的认知，就是对 A、B、C 轮怎么样进行就是区分，所以说我们采取了就是按投融资额来区分的这样一个简单的模式。我们可以就是注意到的就是在单笔1000到5000万美金的这个区间，其实是有一个就是在过去的2年之间是有一个很高的增长。 这个也是表明了，就是说在东南亚在过去2年涌现出了一些能够单笔的就是投资达到1000万以上的一些基金，还有一些就是海外的基金，在这个区间呢更加关注东南亚，这是一个比较有意思的现象。Over to you.
Next slide, I think we can explore when we get into Q&A, but a brief summary is that it looks like the earliest stage of the ecosystem in Southeast Asia is slowing down or going flat. So Southeast Asia is already getting all the capital it needs, it seems, while the 10 to 50 million deals are ticking up quite nicely. And this is a direct consequence of all these $100 to $500 million funds having been raised in the last couple of years. So these are the two charts at the lower left.
OK，这张其实是上面那张幻灯片更具体的一个展示然后大家也可以看到，就是在相对来说比较早期，1000万美金以下的时候，的融资，它的数量和金额都是没有增长，甚至出现了一些下降。但是1000万到5000万美金之间的这个融资出现了就是很有趣的增长。
And moving to the next slide and slightly higher level observations, again, coming back to this year being very unusual year with the pandemic and all, surprisingly, to me, Southeast Asia held up relatively well. Give or take 15% of a loss of investment from last year comparable period, that's actually within a statistical mistake for our research methodology. So Southeast Asia holds up rather well comparing to other regions. Jianggan, I actually have no idea how China fared. Maybe you have a number on this one.
OK，这一张给大家看到的是在20年上半年全球的整体的就是创投的投融资在疫情的影响下都出现了一些下降。可以看到的是东南亚不管是在就是投资额跟投资笔数的2个维度下降的幅度其实是比全球比欧洲都是要小的，其实跟印度是差不多。然后这个方面其实我们没有中国的太具体的数据，所以说这个方面可能可能我们不是太清楚是中国的这个方面到底是什么样子的。如果大家谁知道这个方向的发展的话，也可以跟我们分享一下。I'm just saying that if anyone knows about this, please feel free to share with us about what's going on in China.
Absolutely.
I do have some data sources, but I'm not sure how reliable they are. So.
Sure. And moving on to the next slide. So while we do not have an agreement in the ecosystem as to what Series A, Series B, and whatnot are, we at Cento have come up with our own definitions. We define pre-A round as a round where product market fit is still being located. Series A is where it's been built and found initially, and now there is scaling within one market in Southeast Asia. And Series B is the round that enables either dominance in the domestic market or a scale up into the region. That's how we tag the transactions. And from the perspective of this methodology, you can see how the various rounds are evolving.
刚才提到就是说，在东南亚对就是 A 轮、B 轮的这个定义还不是有一个就是业界公认的标准。那这边 Cento 这边的就是定义就是A 轮是让一个公司能够在因为大家也知道，就是东南亚并不是一个单一的市场，而是由10个市场或者说6个主要市场组成的。然后 A 轮的话是让一个公司能够在单一市场进行就是扩张。然后 B 轮的话，可能是就是目的是让一个公司能够在单一市场取得就是占主导的地位，或者说在区域里面开始扩张。Yeah.
And staying on this slide just for a moment longer, it's also important to notice, let's just stay on this one, that we are doing a very high-level summary across the region today, and it's not a very homogeneous region. So Series A of $10 million is not unusual in Singapore, while in Myanmar, Series A of 1 million is credible and possibly buys you the same level of resource. And then there is anything in between.
OK，同时就是像我们刚才提到的，就是这个区域里面的差异其实是非常大的。也就是说， 我们在新加坡其实现在看到的单笔1000万的 A 轮已经是相当常见了，但是呢，在比如说缅甸这样的国家，就是单笔100万美金的A 轮已经是相当不错了，可能拿到的资源在当地能够拿到的资源其实差不多了。
And now moving on to the next slide, and this is the research that has been done jointly by our teams. It looks like over the course of last 7 years, definitely more Chinese funds are being seen in transactions in Southeast Asia, but it is not nearly as big a chunk of the investment ecosystem in Southeast Asia as the world seems to think. In my conversations with our co-investors from the US and Europe, they tend to make an assumption that Southeast Asia is pretty much dominated by Chinese investment. So this number of 5 to 7% of all the deals that feature any sort of Chinese money is actually usually quite a shock to them. Jianggan, I will hand over the slide to you because you know how it was worked out. So maybe you can also comment on the methodology.
OK， 在过去的几年，其实尤其是不管是 Dmitry 包括我自己，就是跟一些来自其他地方，尤其是欧美的一些资方，他们都会有这样一个感觉，就是中国的资本在东南亚过去2、3年，或者说在就是阿里巴巴收购拉扎达之后这几年，就是中国资本在东南亚占据了一个主导的地位。但是实际上呢，就是说从数据的角度来看的话，就是可能实际上进入的投资并没有就是大家想的那么多。Dmitry 刚才也说过，就是说他跟他的欧美的 LP 就是展示这个数据的时候，大家都是处于一个吓一跳的状态，因为很多人都认为就是中国资本现在在东南亚已经占据了一个主导的地位。那这个方面呢，我们也是我们这边的感知呢，就是来这边其实大家开始关注东南亚，就基本上对大部分人来说是一个2016年、17年之后的事情。然后今年的情况由于疫情比较特殊，但是去年前年都会有相当多的中国不管是就是投资基金也好，还是企业也好，在东南亚进行各种考察。但是实际上呢，就是落地的其实这个也应该是可以期待，就是落地的项目或者落地的投资其实是比考察的数量是少很多的。Should we move to the next?
Sure. Next slide is basically the same numbers, but now broken down by geography. And again, Jianggan, it's best if you explain how it was worked up. But I will just comment that it looks like Chinese funds preferences seem to be distributed the same as everybody's else, Singapore and Indonesia being the focus. And there is no geographic deviations. Like, for example, Korean investors tend to skew much heavier towards Vietnam. But with Chinese ecosystem, we do not observe any such deviations.
这张画面其实大家看起来就比较直接了，就是中国资本在东南亚就是各个国家的投资，然后也会比较清楚的看到，就是主要的focus 还是在新加坡跟印尼而且这个跟就是整个东南亚就投资的大势是相吻合的。Dmitry 刚才提到，就是他也注意到，就是中国资本在东南亚其实没有一些就是偏离大势的一些偏好。这个什么意思呢？就是打个比方，在东南亚投资的韩国资本、韩系资本会对越南有一个特别的偏好，但是在中国资本这个方面呢，就是并没有就是看得出来，而主要聚焦的目光跟大势是一样，主要是新加坡跟印度尼西亚。Let's go.
And on the next slide, we can see also the distribution of, let me phrase it correctly, funds from China that are active in transactions by industry. And no surprise, it's fintech and it's what we call retail occasionally or e-commerce and adjacent topics. And you will see if we wanna jump straight away to the next slide, that this reflects exactly the preferences of overall investor community in Southeast Asia. Maybe we can show the audience our next slide briefly. That is the heat map of all the investment that goes into Southeast Asia, not just China.
但是你可以回忆上一张吗？
Yes.
德水，你可以回上一张 slide 吗？就是在过去的一段时间，就是中国基金在东南亚最活跃的领域就是金融科技，包括支付。然后我们这边对零售的定义其实有点广泛，就是包括了电商跟电商的周边，因为最后就是其实就 B2C 电商最后干的就是零售的事情，所以说这个方面可能我们的定义会比较也是有很多就是线上综合线下的一些零售的项目，所以说这个方面我们会整体定义成零售，然后在这几个领域，中国基金其实是最活跃的。然后对水下一页，谢谢。
Moving on to the next slide, just this heat map. Again, I will not dwell on it for much longer because we best come back to it during Q&A. But if anybody wants to have a look at how each particular sector has been popular or unpopular with investors over the years, this is the place to check it out. And it looks like in the last 7 years, we've moved from complete white noise to over-concentration of capital in just local services, ride-hailing and deliveries and whatnot, to a relatively healthy, if early, ecosystem that has a little bit of money for everybody. Still yet not at the level of Europe, not at the level of the US, so still only 4 or 5 segments dominate.
这张图其实很有意思，因为基本上追踪了过去7年在东南亚就是整体投融资的就是产业跟领域的方向。大家可以注意到，就是在早期比如说13年、14年的时候，其实它的尤其13年的时候，就是相对来说比较平均，也没有看得出一个特别的趋势。但是之后呢，就有一个很明显的趋势，就是大量的钱进入了就是本地生活，这个包括像比如说打车啊，外卖啊这些领域。然后这个趋势持续了一段时间。那最近1年半，最近1年或者大半年，我们可以看到一个趋势是，投融资的就是领域的分布会变得更加的平均，也不会像2-3年前那样集中。这个我们觉得是一个相对来说比较健康的发展趋势。当然了，这个也是就是这个趋势的出生还比较早期，所以说还没有能够达到，比如说在其他国家，欧美甚至中国的一个趋势，就是说有大量的领域会被别人去关注，有大量的就是不同领域的公司会得到融资。
We can go through the next slide rather quickly. It's pretty technical, but it's designed to illustrate that Southeast Asia has become a little bit more mature and there are no major disruptions in the fundraising cycle of a startup. So there is a mature ecosystem for Series A, pretty decent one for B, nascent one for C. And so there is no point in startup development in Southeast Asia where there are no investors to support them through a certain stage, which is a very welcome development from 7 to 10 years ago.
这张图有点技术性，但是整体上它表达的一个意思是从 A 轮到 B 轮到后期整体上它的这个分布跟发展还是相对来说比较健康的，比较少出现就是一个公司它的增长到了一个阶段，然后这个阶段没有相应的资本来对它进行扶持跟补贴的一个地步，所以说整体的发展就是从阶段跟资金的 availability 的角度来讲的话，还是相对比较健康的。
And now to the next slide, which is always a matter of significant debate. So allow me to spend a little bit of time first on methodology before we get to the substance of it. So Southeast Asia has always been represented through multiple lenses, as many governments and many investors fight for being able to claim this company or that company as their own. Our methodology for figuring out which country the company belongs to is attached to its revenue. In other words, if a company derives all or most of its revenue from country X, it gets filed into country X regardless of where it's incorporated. And it has multiple revenue cores, and it's not possible to say that there is one specific country that gives it more than 50% of its revenue, then we call that company regional. Furthermore, we try to only highlight companies on this slide where valuation is publicly known or could be confirmed. So please do not consider this slide complete. There are at least as many logos as we have here absent, because while companies have reached certain valuation, we cannot publicly disclose it yet. And then we'll get to substance, but let's translate this one first.
Okay, sure, not a problem. 其实，在东南亚，大家会注意到的一个情况就是有些公司关于这些公司的归属其实会有一些争议就比如说很多单一国家的公司，其实它的公司的注册地是在新加坡，但它可能主要业务是在印尼，或者说有些公司同时在几个国家进行业务，所以这个里面的话会有一些争议，就是说这个公司到底属于哪个国家？这里我们采取的划分法呢，就是看这个公司的就是营收是主要来自哪个国家。如果它的营收主要是来自印尼，尽管它的注册地可能是新加坡，这里大家应该可以看到一些案例，那我们会把它归成印尼公司。如果一个公司它的就是整体的营收是呈一个分布的状态，并没有任何一个国家占据绝对主导的地位的话，那我们会把它就是当成就东南亚的区域公司。然后有一点就是需要注意的是，其实这张图应该不是绝对完整的，因为市场上还会有一些公司它实际的估值达到了一定的阶段，但是没有通过任何形式公开出来，所以说实际的公司应该可能比这个数量稍微多一点点。Go ahead.
So perhaps we will come back to the slide again during Q&A session because there is much to discuss there. But for the moment, I'll just make one comment, which is it would seem that company creation between 0 and 100 mil in Southeast Asia has really started in earnest. And it further looks like while Indonesian companies are capable of reaching this and even getting to half a bill to a bill range while just staying at home, most of the rest of the region requires companies to go regional to cross this threshold. With an exception, a significant exception of Vietnam, which despite being a relatively small market, somehow produces a lot of 100 million and plus companies without ever having to send them to the region.
这张等一下如果 Q&A 的时候，大家对这里面特别的一些东西公司如果有问题的话，我们可以等一下再来回顾。这里面是需要指出的是，其实在就是估值在小于1亿美金或者靠近1亿美金的情况下，这个每个国家其实都有很多的公司。然后如果估值大于1亿美金，少于5亿美金，然后估值大于5亿美金的话，其实很少，除了大于5亿美金或者达到独角兽级别的，除了印尼的公司之外，其他很少有单个国家的公司能够达到这样的水平。可能唯一的一个例外是越南。大家可以看到，就是在越南的这几家就是大的公司，其实都不是区域型的公司，而只是在越南一个国家，在单一国家能够达到就是5亿以上，甚至独角兽级别的估值，这个是越南一个比较特别的现象。
Maybe one last comment here is that please do not consider the geographic classification here to be a given. Companies keep growing, and as companies from especially Malaysia and Thailand grow, they almost automatically become regional. These countries have been quite good at providing developing teams that can go regional. So even in this slide, I think we are on the verge of reclassifying Carsem and Pomelo from just Malaysia and just Thailand into a regional position, because everything we know about these companies suggests that they've worked out how to operate in 2 or even 3 markets at the same time and have their revenue distributed way beyond domestic market. So watch that space, there will be updates to the file.
这里有一点需要指出的是说，这里我们进行了一些就是地域的划分，其实并不是绝对的。尤其大家可以注意的是，来自于马来西亚跟泰国的公司，当他们达到一定的阶段的时候，几乎是注定要往区域扩张。具体的在这张图上的话，我们可以看到2家公司，一个是来自于马来西亚的，就是二手车的电商 Carsem， 第二个是来自泰国的，就是服装就是电商Pomelo，这两家公司已经开始在区域扩张的路上已经有一些就是成就了，然后可能很快我们就会把它就是重新划分为区域型的公司，而不是说单个国家的公司。
And now moving on to the next slide. The purpose of this exercise for us is to understand how much of Southeast Asia's economy has already been digitized. So it could be digitized by independent startups or large companies, as on the previous slide, but there is also a variety of verticals where digitization is being done not by independent companies, but by subsidiaries of larger companies, be it Lazada on behalf of Alibaba, be it Bigo on behalf of JOYY, be it Agoda on behalf of Priceline. So we felt it's useful to create a slide that would contain the more prominent brands and digital subsidiaries of large international corporates that represent successful stories in 100 million and a billion range in Southeast Asia. And then I will comment separately about the bottom of the slide. It's peculiar.
OK，这张图会比较有意思，因为我们刚才看到是就是来自东南亚的创业公司分别达到就是相应的估值那我们也注意到就是在东南亚其实也是有很多就是国际或者说来自区域外的集团拥有的子公司然后他们也在这个就是整个东南亚数字化的过程中发挥了很大的作用。然后这个里面就打个比方，就是阿里巴巴旗下的 Lazada 跟那个环球时代 YY 旗下的 Bigo，这两家其实都是在东南亚其实有蛮大的就是存在，这个所以我们觉得就是在考虑整个东南亚的这个就是创作的发展来说的话，就这些公司是不应该忽略的。然后，Yeah。
And finally, at the bottom of the slide, we found the home. Let's stay on the previous, please. We found the home for another class of companies, without whom we cannot really tell the story of Southeast Asia. These would be players that are based out of Southeast Asia or have a reputation for having come from Southeast Asia, but their revenue is really global or comes from a different region. Singapore specifically is a host to a whole bunch of companies that might be on occasion understood as Southeast Asian, but when you look at their books, you will see that majority all of their sales are in the US or India or China. I call it the Israel effect. We feel the need to separate these companies from the rest of the crowd because they have their own capital dynamics and their own level of technological sophistication, and they are almost a parallel ecosystem that does not really represent Southeast Asia's economy.
这里需要指出的是，在这张幻灯片最下面的那一行，包括 MDAC、包括 Trax、包括 Wigo 这样的公司，这些公司呢是，总部设在东南亚，或者是说，就是传统上注册在东南亚的一些公司，然后，但是呢，这些公司的很多情况下，这些公司的它的那个整体的营收。东南亚并不占它大部分，甚至说很多时候就是东南亚只占它很小的部分。但是这些公司在新加坡或者东南亚有自己的存在然后我们觉得就是这几乎是一个平行的生态系统那当然当然虽然他们在东南亚的整个就数字经济里面并不占到一个很重要的地位，但是由于这些公司就是地理上还是在东南亚有一个总部的存在，所以说我们会把它就是单独列开来，就是大家知道，就是这边也有这样的一个存在。
I would suggest that in the interest of time, we skip the next slide and the next slide, and basically all the way into a slide number exit proceeds. Sure. Why don't we go here first? The slides we just skipped are the country by country walkthrough that explains how different countries and how different segments fare in creating digital enterprise. But let's shift to topic of exit proceeds. I'll make a quick pause just to explain why we skipped the slides.
上面我们对就是单独国家其实都有一些就是关注每个国家的图文字在今年上半年发生的情况，然后跟以前的比较。那因为今天的时间关系呢，我们就不一一的就是过了。等一下如果 Q&A 的时候，如果大家对单个国家有特别的问题的话，我们可以一一的解答。那这里我们想就是可能跟大家过一下的是关于东南亚的投资退出这个方面。
So as our investors always ask us, so it's all good and interesting, but what about the exits? We decided to commit the rest of this presentation to just figuring out how exit liquidity works. As you know, in Southeast Asia, IPOs are not really a thing, which is not to say that occasionally they don't generate a little bit of proceeds, but by far and away, the biggest source of liquidity are trade exits and secondary purchases.
So can you repeat the last part?
I'm just saying that while IPOs are occasionally seen, really it's about trade exits and secondaries, different combinations.
OK， 就是在推出这个方面的话，就是其实大家也看到，就是东南亚的 IPO， 就是这个图上橙色的部分，其实是相对来说比较少的。然后并购其实是作为一个推出的，至少在目前为止一个很主流的路径。
And while year on year, we have all sorts of interesting outliers and debatable topics, such as, for example, Bigo, whose business is mostly in Southeast Asia, but it's really being acquired by YY, which is not really an arm's length transaction. There is a lot of irregular transactions, but overall, I would say that in a given year, something like $1 billion to $2 billion of liquidity does flow to investors into Southeast Asia from something like 40 to 60 transactions. And that has been a steady effect for the last 3 to 4 years. So there is a steady corporate demand for digital subsidiaries in Southeast Asia.
在这里就是虽然我们在东南亚就是退出这个方面，其实有一些退出的案例，其实是有一些就是争议的，就比如说YY 收购Bigo 这个是到底是一个正式的退出呢，还是就是左手转右手？这个方面是有争议的。但是呢，我们可以就是看得到的是，每一年都会有大概10到20亿美金呢，就是资本就是能够回流到投资人的手上。然后这边就是大部分是通过就是企业在东南亚的就是对数字领域并购的需求来实现的。
Side by side with corporates who generate most of this demand, there is of course asset managers and family offices. We will speak of them all later. And they also provide a significant amount of liquidity to players in Southeast Asia. And this is where our methodology, I think, cannot grasp it all. I am afraid we only see half of what's going on or less because a whole lot of secondaries are happening offshore and are not published. Luckily for us, though, they are concentrated in just 5, 6, 7 top companies such as C Group, Gojek, Grab, Tokopedia. So I don't think we're missing too much for the rest of the ecosystem.
在并购这个领域呢，其实除了就是大的企业之外然后我们也看到一些就是资产管理公司跟一些甚至一些叫做办公室参与一些并购的案例，所以这个里面的话，其实并不是所有的案例能够被有效的追踪到，所以这个里面可能会错过一些。不过呢，就是这里值得提出的是，在大的技术公司，像 Grab， 像那个就东海 C Group， 这些公司进行的一些并购呢，相对来说是比较容易追踪的。幸好就是目前这样的公司还不是很多。
And the chart on the far right of this slide is, I think, possibly the most important chart of the entire presentation. If you are not a speculative investor in Southeast Asia, if you are not trying to buy and quickly sell, if you are a long-term equity holder, this is extremely important to understand that an exit of $30 to $50 million in Southeast Asia is a good, reasonable, and most commonplace outcome. Whereas if you're exceptional, if you've built an organization that works across Southeast Asia, that generates 20, 30, $40 million, and that's actually revenue a year, and that's actually a good acquisition target, the expectations between 100 million and 200 million for valuation at an exit are reasonable. So beyond all the talk of unicorns, these are an extremely important set of numbers to keep in mind. Having said that, these are numbers from the past. So hopefully next 10 years will show us numbers that are much better.
OK 这里会把大家的注意力转移到就是这个幻灯片上最右边的一张图啊。那这张图呢，可能对投资人来说相对比较重要，因为从这张图上你可以看到，就是至少在过去的几年里面，在东南亚的退出3000到5000万美金左右的退出事件还是最频繁的。然后如果就是一个公司能够做到，比如说3000万、4000万的营收，那这样的话可以就是在出去的时候得到1亿美金以上的估值。所以说在很多注意力都放在独角兽上的时候，其实大家会发现就是过去的几年在3000万到5000万美金左右的这个退出案例其实是最普遍、最频繁的。然后这个也让大家就是至少知道就是在目前市场上是一个什么样的预期。当然了，就是过去的一个解读，但未来的10年呢，我们期待就是说这个数字能够变得更好一些。
We can skip the next slide as it just breaks down exits into various size groups and go straight to the next slide, which shows us which countries produce companies that are most in demand. No surprise, up until now, it's been mostly Indonesia and Singapore, with a chunky presence from Vietnam a couple of years back.
在这里大家可以看，就是这张图，体现的就是在东南亚就是不同的国家的项目的就是推出的一个情况。不出意外的就是在怎么说呢，在就是新加坡跟印尼的项目的推出还是占了，就推出收益还是占了整个东南亚的大部分。然后比较有意思的是，在2年前左右，越南有出现了一些就是比较大的退出，然后但是就是整体上还是新加坡跟印尼占有绝对的优势。
With a huge caveat that this slide is important to understand. Sorry, there is an important caveat on this slide, which is regional companies and proceeds from exiting those are entirely excluded from the statistics. Because if somebody sells $100 million worth of Grab shares, I really don't know which geography to put them into. So this is just the companies that can be located to a single country.
有一个很重要的东西要提出的，就是在这张图上，我们并没有包括一些区域的公司，而是只是说单个国家业务的公司。打个比方，如果有比如说关于 Grab 的二级市场的一个比如说1亿美金的交易，那我们其实并不能够有效的把它归属到那个国家去。所以说我们没有在这个图上体现，也是为了就是这样的交易可能会对这个图的就是整体的展示会有一些影响。所以说我们并没有就是包括这些。
And if we move on to the next slide, we will see that in another sign of maturity, at least early maturity in Southeast Asia, there is no longer just one type of buyer that buys all the companies that we have to sell. So it's not in a monopolistic market. We have local digital majors, we have international digital companies, we have very much representatives of traditional offline economy. And on top of that, in more speculative years, asset managers buy quite a fair bit of equity from each other. That's the orange color on the top. So diversified set of customers for digital companies is a good sign for the ecosystem.
OK 这张图比较有意思的一个解读就是在过去几年中大家会发现一个比较健康的发展，就是在并购方的分布的话出现了更加多元化的趋势。不只是说区域的或者本地的一些就是数字化的公司，或者说一些国际的，比如说电商互联网的集团，然后其实还是有一些就是本地的传统的公司也在就参与并购行为。 偶尔呢，我们也会看到有一些资产管理的公司通过二级市场的交易，能够帮其中一些其他的资产管理公司实现退出，所以说这个整体的交易我们会发现会更加活跃。
I'll speed up a little bit in the interest of time and just summarize the next 3 slides as rather interesting ones, which I recommend going through separately to see which countries buy from which countries and in which industries. Considering today's audience, I'll just summarize that China is by far the #1 in terms of US dollars, even though it's only been, the Chinese ecosystem only drove 18 liquidity events over the course of last 7 years, so not this many. And it would seem that Chinese acquirers give a very high level of priority to regional companies, which is to say the most mature ones, and tend to prefer retail and entertainment as their sectors of where acquisition interest is concentrated.
这几张图可能会就是给大家一个具体的，就是说整并购行为的一个划分。在这里面我们可以注意到，就是来自中国的收购方还是占在绝对的收购金额上面还是占一个很大的比重的。然后这个里面我们也发现，就是来自中国的并购方，主要的就是并购的领域还是发生在2个领域。第一个是我们刚才提到的，就是包括电商跟电商相关的零售领域；第二个是就是数字娱乐领域。这2个方面我们看到，就是中国的并购的，就是不管是金额什么东西，还是就是占一个比较大的份额的。Yeah.
And to Kevin Zhang's question, I think question 3 was, let's talk about where the investment comes from. So we just answered half of your question, which is where do the acquisitions come from? Where investments come from is a separate story. Let me just jump into the last slide, and also possibly not the most important, but definitely my favorite, which is our slightly tongue-in-cheek attempt to calculate the investment efficiency of various ecosystems in Southeast Asia. So if you took all the dollars various countries and the region as a whole absorbed in the last 7 years, and all the dollars they gave back to their investors, and if you keep in mind that we see not 100% of everything that's happening, the most capital efficient investment destination of the last 7 years has been undoubtedly humble market of Malaysia.
这张图可能是你们是最喜欢的一张图，因为这张图想要表达的是，就是在不同国家你的资本的投入产出比，这个是把每个国家就是投入的资本跟投资人能够收回的资本，这样做一个简单的比较，然后我们可以发现的话，就是在整个区域里面，整个投入产出比最高的是马来西亚，而且这个就是还是相对来说比较明显的。
But let's not take this slide too seriously, because it obviously ignores a massive amount of value that has been built in other countries, but just hasn't had a chance to be liquidated.
不过这里也需要注意一下，就是说，因为这张图可能并不一定在时间线的角度上就是有绝对的作用，因为毕竟就是很多在其他国家的投资可能只发生在最近几年，并没有就是还并没有实现退出。
I'll round up, so I will not bore this audience with our methodology. I will just highlight 3 very important items that one has to keep in mind when they read this report or any other report in the region. One I've already alluded to a few times. Our data is not perfect. We have very little visibility into offshore secondaries, and we cannot process all the small deals of $10,000 and $20,000, so we just exclude them. Second big caveat is that, as we all know, valuations don't matter. It's terms that do. So while we are forced to say that $200 million company is twice as big as $100 million company, you all know that if one has liquidation preferences of 5x and another one only sold ordinary shares, the situation is the reverse. And the third massive caveat, which is gigantic, is that we just spoke about purchases of equity. We are not talking at all about borrowing, balance sheets, and liabilities that that surround this ecosystem that are not expressed in equity at all. It's beyond our ability to collect this data, but I keep asking larger, more established research institutions to go and figure it out. For the moment, we'll just have to look at half of the picture.
对整个报告呢，就是这里我们还要提3个，就是可能要注意的地方。第一点的话，就是这个报告的其实数据并不是绝对的完整，就是如果区域里面有很多很早期的，比如说1万、2万甚至几万美金的这种交易，我们其实并没有追踪那些投资。然后第二点呢，就是大家都知道，就是绝对的估值可能并不一定有，就是这些投资的条款来的重要。就是比如说同样估值的公司，可能因为条款的不同，会给就是投资人或者说就是创始团队带来的收益会很不一样。所以这点的话，其实我们并没有追踪相应的条款，而我们这边看到的就是在各个领域、各个阶段、各个国家，就是绝对的我们能够追踪到的数字。然后第3个的话，就是可能也比较重要的，就是我们这里就是体现的数字，或者说我们这里追踪到的数字的话，就是只包括股权融资债权并不在我们的考虑范围内。因为涉及到债权的话，这个其实还是相当麻烦，因为有很多不同的东西需要考虑，然后也有很多的债权的融资其实并没有能够通过一个就是很公开的渠道去追踪这些数据。那这个我们也跟一些就是行业里面比较大的就是专门做research 的公司交流过这个事情。可能在不久的将来，他们或许能够对这个债权做一个比较好的追踪，但是目前据我们来说市场上是没有比较好的对这个方面的追踪的。Voilà.
And that's really it. We took a little bit more time, but I hope it was at least somewhat fun. And now 2 questions.
Yep. 所以我们其实都已经把这个就是presentation 就是简单的过了一遍，然后我觉得接下来的话就是大家如果有些什么问题的话，可以就是在那个对话框，或者说也可以就是说直接向我们提出。那我们看到就是对话框里面其实已经有一些问题了，说Dmitry, I think let's just go through the questions that have already been raised. So for instance, Kent Lin has probably been waiting for 50 minutes for the question. Can you summarize the fundraising events for Southeast Asian VCs this year? 也就是说，这个问题呢，就是VC 从 LP 那边募资在目前的一个情况。
Actually, this is the type of data we do not collect because Deal Street Asia is doing a good job on this, and Preqin, the standard source of data for such, is catching up. From my very anecdotal feel of the ecosystem, international LPs only slowed down maybe in March, April, when they were shocked by lockdowns in London and New York and occasionally Tokyo, but now they're back in full swing. Local, so everybody who relied on international LPs seems to be proceeding fine, extra couple of weeks here, extra couple of weeks there. Local LPs in Southeast Asia, conglomerates and families and family offices disappeared from the market almost entirely. They're being hit on every direction. They're not sure how to do allocation. They're pulling out of commitments and reconsidering their VC exposure. And then sovereign entities, I cannot even comment. They are doing everything at once. I see different parts of Temasek doing different things simultaneously, so really hard to comment.
这方面的话，其实就是在具体的数字的角度来讲的话，我们其实并没有一个追踪。如果你要看一些就是可能对市场的一些统计一些数字的话，东南亚这边有一家做就是这个方面单独的就是媒体叫 Deal Street Asia， 他们会对这个方面的数字有一些追踪。然后国际上的一个叫 Preqin 的，可能大家也都知道，它这个方面的数字也会越来越完整。但是呢，就是从怎么讲呢？从不是从出视角，从我们就是对这个市场的印象的角度来讲的话， 可能就是3月、4月的话，就是一些国际的机构就是一些配资的机构，其实相对来说会比较不活跃，因为旅行变得不可能，然后很多国家也进入了就是说分城分国的模式。还有一个我们注意到的就是说，东南亚本地的很多企业在配资这个方面的活动是进入了一个完全停滞的一个状态。这个是跟他们的就是企业本身的业务受到影响是有关系的，而且很多企业的资本它也开始重新考虑他们对 VC 这一块的整个的就是 exposure， 所以说这个方面就是可能本地的一些配资出现了一些停滞。还有一个就是就是在主权基金这一方面，我们知道就是淡马锡旗下的各个基金还是一直不停的活跃，然后因为淡马锡旗下就是在这个配资其实有好几家基金都在活跃，所以说我们也比较难追踪到就是他们到底是都在做一些什么样的 activities， 所以要想获得全面的数据其实还是有点困难的，但是市场至少会有这样的一个印象发生。So Ken, I'm not sure if that answers your question. If you have any follow-up question, just feel free to raise it. Okay. Let's just move on. What are the main pressure for VCs for the VCs for your own portfolio and LPs during the pandemic? Can you share with us specific example？ 就是怎么说呢？就是主要的压力点。
Well, this is not something I can back with data. I can just speak of our experience as a firm. The biggest headache for us in this downturn has been our co-investors. Some have held firm, and some have been spotted either trying to quickly sell or going back on their commitments. So managing that has been a full-time job for the last 5-6 months. Other than that, it really depends on the company. Food delivery thrives, logistic thrives, travel sector died, payment happy, gaming super happy. So we have to get to a specific case. But overall, my experience of last 6 months has been, it's very good to have reliable people in a cap table side by side with you.
OK，这个方面其实就不是一个通过数字能够解答的一个问题了，但是可以观察到的就是，对 Dmitry 个人来说的话，就是最近的5-6个月，最难管理的可能就是项目的联合投资方，因为很多时候就发生了，就是他们想要就是很急迫的退出，或者说就是并没有就是履行就之前的一些承诺，所以这个方面就花了很多时间在管理这方面的事情。当然这个也跟我们刚才提到的，就是说很多本地的就企业啊、资本啊，就是就是本身业务受到疫情的影响，还是比较大的。然后这个里面的话，就是可能有一个就比较重要的，就是说你的 cap table 上面就是放了一些什么样的就是资本可不可靠、靠不靠谱。这个对不管是公司或者说就是 VC 来联合投资，这个还是挺重要的。然后具体的行业的话，我觉得大家对这个也应该相对比较清楚，就是比如说外卖物流这几个物流包括就是游戏这个行业，其实最近发展的都不错。然后旅游这个行业就是完全没有动静的。Okay. Question in Chinese. So I think it's related to the skirmishes between China and India for the last few weeks, and I think there's a recent announcement about sort of Paytm, I think, which Alibaba holds the largest share, and it's sort of giving up the sort of collaboration with Chinese companies, and all this sort of uncertainties with geopolitics. So the question specifically asks about so for instance company which has China and Southeast Asia sort of either from business point of view or from capital point of view, how do investors and companies plan the capital structure and the exit route to respond to this?
I wish I knew the answer to this. I can tell you right now that we are in two conversations, one a very late stage company, one mid stage, where Chinese investors and US co-investors don't just coexist peacefully, but actually work very productively. And there is no enmity and there is no caution. They are both cautious about me because of my Russian accent and Russian passport, and occasionally ask me if I've ever worked in Crimea. But they so far talk to each other very productively in Southeast Asia. But I am afraid of Southeast Asia's politicians. The cheapest possible way to a victory or to getting some score is to blame China for everything and start repeating footsteps of India, at which point startups with Chinese money on the cap table will have a problem. And an investor who is side by side with Chinese investors will have to do a little bit of extra work. This has not started yet, but the risks are real.
这个方面就是我先说一下Dmitry刚才说的东西，就是他现在就参与了一些投资里面，就是有中国跟美国的资本，然后双方的协作并没有出现什么样的问题，可能他开玩笑说，可能就是联合投资人对他本身的就是俄罗斯的背景可能问题更大，就是因为他收到美国的投资人几次问过他，就是有没有参加跟克里米亚有关的任何的东西，因为之前俄罗斯吞并克里米亚这个事情嘛，然后然后他会觉得就是说，与其中美的话，就是相对于中美之间的关系的话，就是对东南亚的话，有一个可能的担心，就是某些国家的不管是从政还是在野的政客也好，可能会把一些就是他们目前遇到的一些困难归咎于中国，所以说这个方面的话，可能会对一些中国的公司或者说受到中国资本投资的公司带来一定的困难，然后这个其实也很类似我们在印度看到的这些问题，但是呢，可能目前并不一定在东南亚能够体现，但是就是从一些政客的风格的来说的话，这些危险还是有一定的风险的，然后从我自己的角度来讲的话，就之前我跟就是新加坡政府这边交流过这个事情，就是到底是这个事情对新加坡是有利还是有害？因为很多中国的公司出海还是说投资的话，它其实公司的资本架构都会设在新加坡。那这个趋势的话，我觉得并不会随着就是中美的这些关系或者一些地缘政治的东西，就大家倾向于在新加坡设立就是海外的控股机构的话，这个东西并不会发生变化，甚至说可能还会有些利好，但是长期的话，就是说地缘政治的不稳定性，可能会对整个行业带来的一些波动，可能也会对不管是新加坡还是就是周边的其他国家，会带来就是一定上的情绪化的影响。Sorry, I'm just adding a bit of my perspective. If you think about all these Chinese companies setting up in Singapore as headquarters, well, I mean, there's one voice here saying that Singapore might benefit from that with all this geographic tension, that more companies will choose to set up here. But my sense is that it's happening anyway. Companies will set up their headquarters in Singapore anyway. But all these like fluctuations or sort of turbulences caused by geopolitics would impact the whole sector overall, and I don't think that it's a good thing for Singapore. Anyway, next question. Would you see more unicorns coming up, and how do you see the secondary shares, the trade of secondary shares?
On the second one, there is an easier answer. Secondary trade has been on the up and up. Maybe we should advertise to your audience fundnow.com. They are doing a roaring trade in secondary shares back and forth. This is not our portfolio company, but they're run by friends. And I suspect that if we had visibility into Samoa, Luxembourg, Dubai, and Delaware, we would see that it's actually 4 times or 5 times what I think it is. So secondary trade for the moment is good. Local investors need to get liquidity, foreign investors need to get access. Let's pause here because unicorns is a whole separate kettle of fish.
关于二级交易的话，就是其实在市场上看起来还是相对比较活跃的啊。这里的原因呢，就是本地的投资人他需要其实完成一个退出，然后就是很多就是其他区的投资人他想在这个方面得到一定的怎么说呢？一定的就对这个区域的 exposure， 所以这个方面就是交流还是就是这方面的 trade 还是比较活跃的。然后这个方面其实我们在墨腾的话，我们也注意到很多就是市场上有的一些交易，然后根据不同的公司，然后需求的不同，其实这些交易就是不管是打折也好，什么东西，其实还都是相对比较活跃的。然后这是关于就是就所谓的就是二级的一个交易。然后 unicorn 那块 ，sorry Dmitry about unicorns.
As for the large companies, so I'm a bit of a wrong guy to ask because I am really in disagreement with the term unicorn. You know, any company can issue 1 billion shares and I'll buy one of them for $1. Here is $1 billion valuation. But to be more serious about this, I would say that in the entire history of us tracking this market, companies who crossed $500 million thresholds have not stopped. They always make it past the bill. There seems to be a point which Jianggan, Zelingo, Property Guru, Carousel, Ruan Guru, VMPA have all crossed, where escape velocity has been achieved. And now global investment community sees them. So they will have easier and easier access to capital with possibly negative cost of it. So I would say companies you see in $500 million range in our slides, yeah, 2 years from now, unless the world comes to an end, they will be worth north of $1 billion.
这里他想提出来的一个就是说，如果一些公司它的估值达到了就是5亿美金以上的话，其实是让他们在全球的投资人面前都会有一定的就是曝光度。然后这个的话，就是如果这些公司未来1、2年发展不出现大的问题的话，其实进入就是10亿美金估值或者以上的话，其实并不是一个会是一个比较自然的发展的过程。然后我们并不会看到就是就是这些公司不能够进入，除非他们自己有很大的问题。
Choosing the 100 million and below companies that will become unicorns is a bit trickier, but I welcome you to get in touch and become our investor. Then we'll tell you all about it.
如果是1亿美金估值以下的公司的话，相对来说会比较困难。说这边他说，里面是欢迎大家跟他或者是说成为他的 LP， 或者是说跟他们一起投资，能够就是接触到更早期的 deal。Anyway, next question, crypto exchange. So your viewpoint on blockchain investment in Southeast Asia?
Strongly negative, but I am in a minority. My view of the space is it is not solving any of the problems that Southeast Asia currently faces, with a possible exception of a number of issues in remittances value chain. So we will have to watch companies like Velo. You will see it as one of the major companies up and coming in Thailand to see whether this opinion of mine holds or not. But like I said, I am a pessimist on blockchain, so please ask somebody who is spending more time to understand the space.
他对整个就是区块链这块的，就是看法还是相对来说比较悲观的，因为很多区块链其实的落地应用还是相对来说比较困难的。可能唯一的应用可以唯一的一个就是比较有前景的应用是解决东南亚这个就是整体上就是各个国家之间汇款的整个就是价值链里面可能会有一些应用的空间，这个方面也有一些公司在做一些尝试，可能未来2、3年可能会看到一些成果，但是就是整体上的话，就是大部分的应用场景其实是很难去存在的。 Okay, and next question. I think you answered question 2 of Kevin. Question 3, expect investment among statistics. Could you please share with us the investment allocation come from? Like how much percentage from China, US, European, and other region, and how do you see the allocation connect with VCLP's economic confidence and preference to Southeast Asia? I think the second part of the question is probably more interesting.
Yeah, I think we actually answered a bit of Q3, but we did not get Q2, but let's deal with Q3 first.
Okay, sure.
So which countries are really responsible for majority of investment into Southeast Asia? I have absolutely no idea. So for China, we've joined forces with Momentum Works, and we've worked out which investors could be considered Chinese, and it's tricky, right? An American firm that has an office in Hong Kong, what is it? A Chinese LP in a Russian fund, what is it? And we've managed to come up with that slide that shows maybe 9% of deals in Southeast Asia, including some money from China. But going by gut feel, I sense that this region is bankrolled by Singapore sovereign wealth, Japanese money, even though some of it is earned in China, SoftBank, Alibaba, and a whole bunch of Americans and Germans, but in which proportions I would not be able to tell you. Occasionally, random Russian or Australian shows up, but these are the 4 nations that matter: Singapore, Japan, US, and Germany, with the recent arrival of South Korea.
所以这个方面的话，其实我们在整理这个就是数据的时候，其实我们也是花了很多功夫，就是因为有些资本它的就是来源其实并不是很容易去最终受，比如说就是美国基金在香港的办公室，或者说一个在中国、美国都有很大的 presence 的一个基金，或者是说中国LP 投给俄罗斯人的基金在东南亚做投资，所以说这个方面其实相对来说比较难但是呢，就是在这个市场上我们可以关注到就是几个比较大的力量，就是第一个是新加坡的就是主权基金，包括淡马锡、包括 GIC 以及他们旗下的各路基金，这个是在市场上是非常活跃的。然后第二个就是各种日本势力，就包括日本基金以前在中国赚回来的一些很多实际是被投到东南亚去了。这里有个例子就是软银以前在阿里巴巴手上赚的钱很多都其实被投到了东南亚。然后我们也可以看到一些美国跟德国的资本，然后偶尔会有一些澳大利亚跟俄罗斯的资本就投一些单个的项目，但是可能还没有形成一个比较强的趋势。然后最近2年就是看到了一个趋势，就是韩国的资本相对来说可能变得更加活跃。Over to you.
And there is a very interesting sub-question to this question, which is how do these investments into Southeast Asia connect to the VCLP economic confidence and preferences in Southeast Asia? This is a fascinating one. It's actually going to take a very long time to answer this. I'll just give you one example, one example. Korea. South Korea has been made strongly unwelcome in China several years ago, and the new government of South Korea declared a national plan that effectively aims to redirect some of its supply chains and some of its investment flows to Southeast Asia. The country of focus that they chose was specifically Vietnam. So a lot of insurance companies, a lot of phone manufacturers, a lot of other offline players. And then a couple of years later, suddenly, all the digital players from Korea have started investing heavily into Vietnam and primarily Vietnam. So that's one illustration of how this might work. But in each case of each nation, it's very convoluted. So we'll have to skip this because 1 hour conversation at least.
这是一个就是可能会要花很多时间来仔细的就是解释的一个东西。但是我们可以看到的是，打个比方，就是韩国在我们刚才提到的就是韩国在越南的投资，然后这个其实我们在就是越南的话也会感觉到非常明显，就是很多韩国的资本会在越南会非常积极的不管是看项目也好，投项目也好。这个的话，我们之前就是其实是跟几年前 大家可能记得，就是有一段时间中韩的关系可能不是特别好，然后在那个时候就正好韩国会在就是有一个国家性的战略，就是把一些就是供应链还有一些生产这些东西在东南亚加大投资，然后很多这些投资落在了越南，然后你发现就是跟着这些投资。可能就是韩国的一些，比如说保险一些金融这些东西，这些公司，会进入到越南服务这一整套的韩国的体系，然后再过一段时间，你会发现就是韩国的就资本，韩国的那些数字公司，他们也开始就是大规模的进入越南，这可能是其中一个比较典型的例子。当然了，就是每个案例都不太一样，所以说我们这里也不会有一个就是非常就是general 的一个看法。
And now to the question 2, which we haven't answered yet, which is why are the non-mega deals increasing so slowly? So Kevin, I actually think this is the normal speed at which Southeast Asia is supposed to develop. So this is the speed at which the world learns about the opportunity here. It's moderate, but then again, Southeast Asia has not yet shown massive exits or massive traction. And India is definitely ahead. As for the mega deals, they come, they go, they have no connection to the underlying substance of Southeast Asia from my perspective. This is just Alibaba and Priceline and SoftBank and a couple of other strategics slugging it out. So when they're active, mega deals are up. When they're not active, they're down. So I think what we're seeing in non-mega deals is actually not slow, it's natural.
就我们在就是非大型的投资或者说大型的交易里面，我们看到的就是这个增长为什么会比较慢这个的话就是我们的感觉，这个其实我其实也是同样的感觉，就是这是一个东南亚就是整体发展的一个正常的一个速度，因为很多大的这些交易就是一些大的机会，这个其实跟整个区域的经济的就是现实其实并不一定是有很紧密的挂钩因为然后就是他们在一个特定的时间出现，因为特定的时间就大家都认可这样的一个就是跨区域的一些机会。当然了，就是对其他的就是公司来说的话，可能它的整个发展是相对来说比较自然的一个稳步推进的一个过程。
So question 4, I'll just quickly answer. I think it's extrapolate line from the past, not faster, not slower. Mega deals are impossible to predict, but the non-mega deals, I think they'll steadily add another $200-300 million a year worth of value. There is no reason to speed up or slow down for now.
所以说在这个方面的话，其实它的增长，我觉得会是一个相对来说比较稳步的，可能并不一定特别会快，也不会就是说因为什么特殊的原因就会特别的减速。
And we have one more question, most recently 514.
Yeah, I think there's a question here. Share the PowerPoint. That's not a problem, so we'll do that afterwards. Great to answer my previous question. Back over China in the relationship before I see the trend of China would be forced to pour. China would be forced to pour into Southeast Asia. And also there's a question in Chinese. I think it's something similar. So saying that because of the geopolitics between big countries, so I mean I think it's something that everyone's concerned with. Do you foresee that any particular sort of sectors in Southeast Asia will benefit from that?
From Chinese capital being expelled from India? Just to make sure I understand the
I think it's general like geopolitics, right? Because now there's like a number of fronts that's going on at the same time.
It's kind of hard to see all of this under the COVID mess, because right now nobody's benefiting from anything. Everybody's slowly dying, give or take a couple of gaming companies. I really don't know the answer. Because of my accent, I try not to talk about geopolitics at all. Dangerous.
他说，作为一个俄罗斯人，就是讨论地缘政治，其实是一个比较敏感跟比较 比较危险的一个东西，所以说这个方面不想讨论太多。然后，其实就是今年的整个这个情况其实是非常的乱，因为又不只是地缘政治的紧张，还有包括就是整体上这个疫情的发展，其实让很多事情就是变得比较难去分析，因为有很多因素可能就是同时来会影响一些一些就是怎么讲呢？一些不管是赛道也好，不管是什么不管是也是说各个行业或者国家的发展也好，所以这个里面其实有很多因素的影响。至少我觉得从我们这边，从摩托这边我们观察到的就是最近几个礼拜就是来关注东南亚的中国公司，有一个蛮明显的就是向上增长的一个趋势，就是嗯，可能之前比如说去年有一些就是陆续的一些公司要出海过来考察什么东西，今年上半年就是几乎是一个相对来说比较停滞的一个状态。然后但是现在的话就是很多人在试图以各种渠道去了解东南亚治安，然后这个趋势我们看起来还是蛮明显的。I was just saying that that we do not see. I mean, we see that this clear trend of what we have been in touch with is that more and more Chinese companies, especially the last 2 months, been looking at Southeast Asia, intensively looking at Southeast Asia. So we suspect it is. I mean, this might have something to do with the macro geopolitics with the US, with India, etc., etc. But we have not made effort to ascertain that.
Yeah, let's do another research in 6 months just on has velocity of Chinese capital into Southeast Asia increased from second half of 2020 onwards? That would be interesting.
OK， 这个的话可能就是我们因为现在还处于一个相对来说比较早期的阶段，就是很多事情还是处在一个变化的过程中，所以要看得非常清楚，可能并不是一件非常容易的事情。那这个事情呢，我们其实自己之间也讨论过好几次，可能这是会是一个我们就是持续关注的一个领域嘛，可能过去未来的可能半年左右的时间，我们可能会有一些就是对这个领域是比较具体、比较经过分析的一些观察，到时候也可以跟大家分享。
But if there is one way to finish this on a cheerful note, it's, and Jianggan, please feel free to chime in here. My understanding of ASEAN in the last 15 years, small though it is, suggests that this community of nations does not make sharp moves. So every particular politician or any particular policeman or customs officer might become more aggressive, demanding payoffs, but as a whole, the region it doesn't have anyone as powerful and as nationalistic as Modi to effect full closing of borders, full expulsion of apps. So I think it will be more of the same with a little bit more troubled waters to navigate, but I don't think we should really worry about ASEAN going full India in the next few years, hopefully.
OK， 就是这点其实我也蛮同意的，就是在东南亚这么多年，就是我们觉得整体上就是东南亚的整个的就是民族主义情绪还是什么样的也好，虽然偶尔会有一些比如说政客啊，会有一些就是有影响力的人或可能会做出一些比较不友好的举动或者一些措施，但是整体上的话。像目前出现在印度的这样极端的，或者说目前就是川普在美国出现的这样一些极端的措施，我们觉得在未来的2年过程中，还是在东南亚是比较不会发生的吧，比较不太会发生，所以说这个区域的话，就是我觉得对一个长期的发展，对这个资本的卷入的话，我觉得虽然是有一些风险，但是。相对来说的话，就是风险并没有，就是比之前我们看到的对印度的风险，跟目前就是美国遇到的这些风险还是低很多的。I think Dmitry has answered all the questions. and I think let's leave about 5 minutes. Alfonso, so you want to share some of your perspectives, because you have been trying to make connections about what's happening in Southeast Asia, where we are, and which are the things that's reasonable.
Sure. Well, one of the main things is to consider that many things have changed during this last 20 years. Like you can see that China, for example, increased like the investment levels and basically improved the entire infrastructure in the country in very little time. And part of that kind of improvement moved somehow to Southeast Asia. And I'm not talking only about money. I'm talking about things like information. I'm talking about things like people moving. I'm talking about ideas, business models, and many other things. So I think that it is very interesting. So if China has improved vastly during the last 20 years, in Southeast Asia, we can also see something similar. Is that okay for you to translate?
Yep. 所以过去几年我们在就是东南亚看到的就是中国的影响，其实远不只是就是在就是单纯的投资方面，其实在很多的信息，很多的就是包括一些货物，包括一些就是就基础设施方面，其实中国在东南亚其实是有多层面的影响的，然后这些影响呢也会。包括一些就是一些人流啊这些方面的影响，我觉得就是对东南亚之后的发展还是会起一个比较大的作用的。
Okay. Yeah. So I think it is very interesting also that now it is called like the digital era. Especially basically we will find like vast amount of information. And basically this vast amount of information, it is now being difficult to process. So basically in the past we have problems to create information. Now we have problems to process the information. Maybe you want to translate that now, just to introduce the topic.
No, just keep going.
So with this information that is very difficult to process, you will see something similar also that is going to happen in Southeast Asia. So basically what we try to do with this report is to process all of that information that is related to the countries in order to provide a digestible and friendly way to being introduced to the region.
所以其实这里面就是做一个预告，就是因为Alfonso跟团队我们在过去的就是在封城的这段时间，我们也在就是就是因为平时我不知道大家知不知道，就是墨腾本身的话，其实我们并不是一个媒体，也不是一个咨询机构，其实我们更多的时间是花在自己在孵化自己的项目上面。所以说过去几个月，其实我们相对来说比较就是时间上比较充裕的情况下，我们其实是想就是把整个东南亚进行了一些比较系统的分析，然后就是让大家知道，就是东南亚在各个行业各个领域，到底是一个什么样的阶段，然后各个行业的就是机会到底是一个什么样的内在的关联，然后这个里面就是我们其实是有一份就是即将要推出的报告，这个让大家可以比较准确的就看到就是在每个领域每个国家每个阶段，就是除了就是投资者的信心之外，他们这个发展到底到了一个什么样的地步，然后是否就是适合下一步的投资，是否就是更多的资金进来能够让这些领域得到更好的发展。So I think Alfonso just mentioned that we're previewing a report which we would sort of give people a very sort of solid understanding and connections about the exact development stages of Southeast Asia in multiple sectors, and this is irrespective of the of the confidence or lack of confidence that investors have been putting in the field. I mean, our sense is that if the opportunities are there, if the time is right, investment would be required and would be nice to push things moving forward. But the infrastructure or the investment alone would not push the economy, the digital opportunities forward.
Right. So do you want to continue with this, or okay?
Yeah, you want to share?
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen. Okay. So when we're faced with this amount of information, we basically try to simplify everything by answering what is behind economic growth, what is behind the development of certain countries. And basically we try to answer the question, what are the key drivers of economic development? And basically we found, we created some sort of framework in order to be able to answer these questions. And everything can be summarized in three main, we call it forces. So one is the force of the infrastructure of the country. And this is going to be basically determine the level of salaries, the level of factories, basically the rural, urban population. It will be the motor of technology and many other things. The other thing is basically the state of the human capital. So you will have the state of the education, the state of the salaries of the population. You will have the possessions that they have. You will have like many things, the health, etc., etc. And the other force is basically going to be how exposed is that country to the competition or to different countries, how connected it is. And basically this will determine the flow of information, the flow of people, the flow of money, the flow of everything between countries. So this is very important to understand basically the economic development. So if you can say that a country is improving in terms of their economy, is because they are doing something good in terms of the infrastructure, the connectivity, and the human capital. A balanced country basically will be able to keep those dimensions aligned. Maybe that's enough for translation.
所以这个里面我们把就是东南亚的整个的就是经济的发展进行了一个分解，然后我们想就是了解的是具体是什么样的因素能够就是促进这个领域的这个领域整体的发展。所以说我们分析了很多的数据之后，就是其实或者很多的指数之后，最后其实归根到三大类，就是第一类是基础设施。包括它有的一些经济的基础设施跟一些产品的基础设施，然后还有就是人力资源，包括就是我们所谓的 human capital， 就包括它的教育水平，包括就是人员的技能水平，然后就家庭的可支配收入跟那个就是不同的那些就数字化的一些设备，包括我们常说的就是智能电话的这个持有这是第二块。第三块的话就是连接，包括道路的连接，包括信息的连接，包括电信基础设施的投入。这个方面的话，就是能够给大家一个很清晰的就是idea。这个其实也跟Dmitry刚才提到了，就是东南亚有些领域它的发展速度是一个自然的发展速度，你资本其实并不一定能够把它推得多快，而有些领域的话会是一个比较好的机会，因为需要资本的助推，它能够就是很快的发展起来。Alfonso?
So we basically elaborated this report that is covering the different topics in a holistic way. And we start by doing an analysis of the population density, for example. And we try to make connections related to how people in Southeast Asia is not evenly distributed in the region. And this has very important consequences because, for example, if you see a map of China or if you see a map of the US or Europe, you will see this kind of specific dots that are very interesting that basically represent something like sizable cities, important cities that basically represent, well, obviously cities, but also they represent the connectivity of those of that region. Basically, with more dots distributed evenly in a region, you will have more competition, you will have more trade, and usually all of those countries will have a higher trade openness. That is going to be basically their exposure to international trade, and this is very important. But in Southeast Asia, it is very difficult to see something like that, and this is going to be represented also in physical form in terms of, for example, the infrastructure. So in many cases, the infrastructure will be lacking because they lack that kind of connectivity that is going to be basically the interaction between different people that is basically close to each other. That is something that we were not able to see and that we are not able to see right now. And this is why we also have like mega cities in Southeast Asia. This is something that is in the beginning, it is not something positive.
这里其实我们花了很多时间看的是东南亚一个人口的分布，大家可以看到，就是跟中国或者跟美国，甚至某种程度上跟印度不同的，就是东南亚的大部分的国家人口分布是非常集中，就基本上集中在首都或者另外1-2个城市周围的都市圈。即使是像印尼这样的国家，你也会发现，就是大量的人口是集中在一个岛上。这个里面会对整个区域的投资机会的就是讨论，其实会有一个比较大的影响，因为首先就是我觉得就从中国人的角度来讲的话，就是它每个国家并没有一个很强的纵深，所以说你在一个国家建立起来的优势就是会相对来说比较单薄一点，然后就是互相之间就是形成了一个互动的一个就城市间的互动或者说区域间的互动，这个方面还是会有一定的困难的。所以说倒不是说这个方面会怎么样，而是说就是对这个进行一个有效的认知，可能对就是商业模式的规划会有不一样的一些启发。
Let me skip to some more interesting areas. So while this was a weakness of the region that is basically caused by the geographical fragmentation and things related to that, like the rainforest that you have in Malaysia and in many other countries, or the high amount of islands that you have in Philippines or something like that. Basically, that is going to reduce the connectivity with other countries, but also within the domestic economy. Basically, that is a bad thing. But the good thing is, as you can see in these different charts, is that things have been improving vastly. So these charts are basically covering like 30 years of development. And here you can see that, for example, in a country like Vietnam, and this is also important for you to understand how things have changed. So, for example, in the 90s, in the beginning of the 90s, 30% of the population or let me say in the other case, 70% of the population in Vietnam were employed in agriculture, right? And now it is like around 30% is employed in agriculture. So you have a big change, and you can imagine the kind of lifestyle change that implies, right? And obviously that will improve the salaries, and it will improve the general consumption expenditure, the possession of goods, and many other things. So that is the good thing. It's like if you can answer this, if you can ask this question, like why there is so much focus in Southeast Asia in terms of investment or in terms of companies being emerged here, is because they are actually witnessing this kind of high growth. But the question that you can actually raise right now is, is the region actually developed enough to sustain this kind of companies? And this is basically what we try to answer in this report. Go ahead, Jianggan.
所以我们现在展示给大家，其实是我们其中的一些观察，一些链接嘛。就比如说，你看，就是整个东南亚的区域的发展，其实起步是比较晚的。然后，就你比如说，你看越南就是20年前，其实70%以上的人其实还是居住在农村的，但是在过去的比如说10多年来，就是这些发生了非常的变化，发生了非常多的变化，整个区域就很多领域都出现了高速的增长，然后这个其实会带来很大的一个机会，然后要了解就是它的整个大势的就是增长在哪里，然后我们现在在一个什么样的地方，我觉得这个对以后的不管是投资也好，还是其他的那些就是规划也好，会有一个很大的帮助。
Thank you. So this has immediate consequence in things like the, for example, if the consumption expenditure is limited, or if the technological infrastructure is limited, then how e-commerce is going to be developed, or how different kind of how these super apps are going to be developed if actually you have a large part of the population that is actually living with a very low salary. And I just want to show you this chart that is actually very interesting, that shows basically in the y-axis, it shows the level of investment in terms of gross fixed capital formation per capita. And in the x-axis, it shows the disposable income per household. And while this is a very, it is a very obvious association. Basically, here you can see that that gross fixed capital formation in the red dots that represent basically the state of the Southeast Asia are mixed if you analyze them. So you will see Singapore in the top, you will see countries like Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia like in the middle, and you will see obviously other countries that are lagging behind, like Vietnam, Laos, and Myanmar. And basically what you can see here is like the level of infrastructure in terms of gross fixed capital formation, and the level of salaries, average disposable income per household monthly. So for example, in Vietnam, the average household income, it is actually $429. And why I am raising this thing, because in many cases, the products elaborated by startups tends to be very sophisticated. And basically, if that is the salary of the average household, how they are going to be able to actually to sustain themselves with that kind of salary that tends to be very low. So this is actually, I think it's interesting to realize about actually what is the actual state of the region by just looking at these numbers.
Okay, 所以这个呢，我们看到的就是说，在那个固定资产投资跟就是居民收入这方面，其实还是有一个很强的相关性的。虽然这个就是可能大家听起来会比较明显，但是呢，就是我们可以看到，就是很多，比如说就是不管是电商、互联网企业，就是创造了一些价值、一些东西的话，这些可能是需要一定的收入水平。才是可以支撑的，而且就是我们也要注意到，就是居民的城乡的分布，跟我们之前提到的，就是说大城市跟中小城市的这些分布，这些可能都会影响到，就大家对就东南亚接下来应该能做什么样的事情，不能做什么样的事情，什么样的事情就是已经万事俱备，什么样的事情还欠火候，这个方面可能会有一个就是更加实在的一个判断。
Thank you. I'm going to skip now many slides because this report is huge.
Yeah, it's a huge report.
Yeah, so I'm going to maybe check here. So maybe it is difficult to see right now, but in terms of the telecommunications environment, things have also improved vastly, okay? But there are certain countries that are actually lagging behind. So, for example, in Singapore, you will see that things are actually very high. you could see that basically what I'm pointing right now. Actually, let me use a pointer. The pointer here. What you can see here in the graph is basically the capital investment in telecommunication per capita. And this is just to have a grasp of the development of the infrastructure in the country. So this is basically the level of Singapore. And I don't know if you had calls with Philippines or maybe Indonesia, but in some cases, the internet speed and the quality of the telecommunications in general is not going to be as good. So, for example, in Philippines, you can see the amount per capita right there. So this is interesting because you can actually realize about many things. Like, okay, yeah, I always have problems when I do business in that country. But what about the rest of what about other variables? Let's say the percentage of households that possess a smartphone. In many cases, everyone believes that it's like 100%, but it's actually not. It depends the methodology to capture that information. Usually surveys tends to overestimate that thing. So this is why I wouldn't recommend to do a survey. But for example, in Singapore, like 75% of households own a smartphone. And this is interesting because you may tend to believe that it's actually higher. But if you think in the structure of the society, you will see that around 30% of the people is very old. And you can also, basically, there are also kids. So you will understand in that kind of way, basically, instead of just talking about population in a very naive and empty way, we're basically trying to make this kind of connections in order for the reader to see the depth of how the population is associated with many other things, like the possession of digital goods, the education, and many other things.
所以我们是给大家就是做一个大概的就是解读了，然后这一章是我们就是关于各个国家在电信基础设施上面的一些投资，然后我们也知道就是大家很多时候就关注的就是各个国家的那个就是移动互联网的渗透率，但是这个里面就是并不是一个简简单单的说你卖了多少台智能手机，而是取决于很多因素。网速啊，就是电信基础设施的投资啊，接入的就是成熟程度啊，大家可以发现就是，你比如说新加坡在过去2-3年呢，就是在电信上的投资其实是逐步减少的，然后你可以看到就是菲律宾，在就是电信基础设施上的投入是非常非常少的，而越南在过去几年就发生了变化，就是增长非常快，起点很低，但是增长非常非常快。所以这个里面会影响大家对就是互联网模式的就是整体的就是发展速度跟最后能够达到的一个阶段会形成一个更具体的认识。然后还有一点就是就是你可以注意看一下的就是怎么说呢？新加坡的这个例子，很多人可能以为新加坡的就是智能手机渗透率已经超过100%了，但实际上我们就是多方的数据调查下来，就新加坡的拥有智能手机的家庭可能只占到就是整个新加坡总体家庭数量的3/4。这里有一个很大的原因是跟国家的人口结构，因为新加坡有很多独居的老人，很多人还是没有使用智能电话的，很多1个人、2个人独居的老人，所以这个方面对整个就是商业模式的配置会有一个非常非常大的影响。Alfonso.
Yeah, I'm just gonna maybe show 2 additional slides and that's it.
Do you want to show the scores?
Yeah, I'm going there. Let me show 1 additional and that's it. So, okay, so this is a slide that basically what we're showing is what we're trying to understand is what enables the banking sector. So why this is important, because what we have here in the left axis, it is basically the reserves of deposit money per capita. And basically we are using that as a measure of the penetration or of the success of the infrastructure. It may seem unrelated, but it's actually a very good representation of the success of the banking. So you want countries to have high amount of deposits in the banks. And in the other case, you will see the actual infrastructure in terms of bank branches per 100,000 adults. So here, what you will see is that, for example, in a country like Thailand, they actually have a lot of banks, and that is actually a bit weird because okay, they have a lot of banks, they have a lot of ATMs, but the thing is that even with that high amount of bank branches, you will imagine, yes, it will be. I would expect that with higher number of banks, with more infrastructure, I would expect that the level of reserves and deposits will increase, right? And as you can see in this chart, you will see Thailand, and you will see Singapore that is actually higher, and you will see Malaysia that has less banks, but it's actually at a similar level. So what is happening right there is that basically Thailand is hitting a roadblock, and that roadblock is the roadblock of the state of the human capital. Basically, the state of the human capital is not developed enough, or in very simple terms, is people doesn't have enough money in order to put that thing, or there are many informal jobs in order to put, in order to be able to increase the reserves of deposit money. So that is also interesting, is that while infrastructure may change very fast, the human capital, it will take a while. It is something that is not going to happen so quickly. If you think Singapore was developed like in, I don't know, 60 years from their modernizations in the 60s. So yeah, it is not so fast to happen, the changes in the human capital.
So I think, Dmitry, you need to run.
Well, yes, apologies. I do have a 6 p.m. call, so it's been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody. If there are any questions, please, I think Momentum Works team can share my contact. And the report is now on the websites of both Momentum Works and ours. And Alfonso, I look forward to reading the one that you've just demonstrated. I quite like the visuals on the density and the statistics. We should go and debate that. But I'll make myself scarce. Please carry on. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Alfonso, do you want to quickly move to the last slide before we conclude the session?
Okay. Yeah. So in these 2 slides, we basically try to summarize using using a collection of indexes. In some cases, we constructed the indexes, and in some other cases, we use some of the well-known indexes. So why is this interesting? Because it summarizes the state of the different countries in terms of the different sections that we cover in the report. So for example, you will see that in a country like Vietnam, for example, the infrastructure is lacking. And this is something that we discussed before. Or you can see that also the banking sector is lacking along with the disposable income. And it is easy to see right here with these indexes that we have. Basically, we put all of this together in order to make sense in a quick way about how you should deal with the different countries if you actually don't know too much. You can also see that, for example, in Thailand, okay, they also have problems with the disposable income. They also have problems with the possession of digital devices. Obviously, in Malaysia, things are much better. Philippines, they also have a very good education levels. They actually have different sources says that like 21% of the population older than 15 actually have some sort of bachelor degree. So that is actually interesting. So these indexes help to guide you through your attempt to enter the region, or to basically make sense of what's going on.
所以这个里面提出的就是我们其实把这个里面所有的就是东西做了一个整理，然后对每个国家就是各领域的基础设施的发展做了一个非常就是说相对来说比较细化的一个分析。这样的话就是对大家的就是之后在东南亚的不管是就是投资也好，不管是业务的拓展也好，至少就是会有一个就是对这个区域发展 现状的一个比较清楚的认知，就是这个我们也是整合了，就是包括我们自己，包括第三方的，就是可能100多个不同的就是指数跟数据点，然后我们最后总和这些可能是对这个市场最重要的。
Yeah, and that's it. Yeah, this is a report that tries to cover quickly the different economics topics and try to digest them in an easy way. Also, the 3 dimensions that we mentioned in the beginning, basically the human capital, infrastructure, and the connectivity, it is something that is it is a constant through the report. So you can basically relate very quickly that, yeah, this country is actually very high in infrastructure, but it's actually lacking in terms of human capital. And that is the idea of the entire report, to make things very friendly for the user.
所以这个里面我们把就是整体上的一些各种因素进行了一个整合，希望对大家以后就是的判断，包括就是如果任何的一个商业模式是不是所有的配套的设施连接度跟人力都能够支撑它的一个行业的发展或者高速的发展，希望对大家的决策能有一个帮助。刚才我看到有人在问这个 PPT 会不会 available？ 所以说我们其实这个 report 还是蛮重的，所以说我们会把一个简化版的免费在网上提供，然后过几天我们会就是把链接发给大家。Okay, I think that's it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Dmitry, and thanks for Alfonso for sharing this. 也谢谢大家的参与。我们今后会不定期的，就是做一些这样的分享，然后也希望就是能够对大家的决策，能够对大家的就是以后的一些业务的拓展，会有一些帮助。然后如果有什么问题，可以随时就是通过微信或者通过电邮联系我们。谢谢大家 ，Thank you。
Thank you.